Thanks so much for joining us. This is a session created by the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster called Trusted Data and AI as a Potential Trusted Data Stream for Disasters. I'm joined here by the co-chairs of the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster, Maggie Glasgow and Dave Jones, who I will pass it off to.
Oh, thanks, Gabby. And hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session and joining. I hope you really feel like opening up and talking about the Trusted Data Now initiative and AI and how that might play a role. I'm sharing my screen here. I just want to go through a couple of things like you've probably heard already with other sessions. Those of you on Zoom, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And turn your camera on when speaking so we can see you. And keeping your camera off will just conserve a little bit of bandwidth. Also, please ask questions via the chat and feel free to engage in conversations. We have, for the in-person attendees, Gabby, I'm not sure if there's a microphone. If you can just talk from the room there and we can hear you, just make sure that the microphone is close by whenever you're asking a question so we can see you. And here's the little URL, the tiny URL for
Dave, yeah. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not seeing your slides. I don't know if it's just me. I'm seeing the notes page.
Oh, you are?
And yeah.
Whoops.
Are you having multiple monitor issues?
Of course I am. Yes. All right, let's see.
Hold on. Let me
let me reshare my screen. How about that? It should change.
There we go.
Okay. So the last one I was just going to say is please sign in via the Google Doc for our session. There's the QR code there. Just add your name, organization. Maggie, if you can put that into the chat, maybe that would be great.
Sure.
And thank you all for coming. So, over the years, we've been talking about trusted data and how we can access trusted data, where we can access trusted data from. And we've been making good progress. We've had a lot of changes, as everybody knows, and whether or not you can actually access data from certain locations. But this is just a little diagram in what we have put together on data being collected, whether it's radar data, satellite data, river gauges, sensors, even storm spotters, other research type data that's being collected that goes into processing and analysis and forecast models. The Weather Service uses a lot of data that's being collected. AI models are using a lot of data. And then it gets distributed to emergency operations centers, emergency notification platforms, in some cases to decision makers, emergency managers, public officials through various channels. And public notification like WEA's, wireless emergency alerts. But, does that really result in action? Does it result in confusion? Just as a little fun fact, most people don't even know where they live on a map when you talk to them about any sort of severe weather heading their way. And so what's the next best option? We've been talking about getting people access to the data, but doing it in a way that is map-based or geospatially friendly. And that way people can orient themselves if they can click on things and see where they are or turn on their location. So data moves really quickly. We want to make sure that in times of hazards, evolving hazards, disasters, that we know where we can go for trusted data. There's 1 million portals out there. There are 1 billion websites out there. There are probably text messages from your mom's friend's friend that tells you when severe weather is coming. But how can we build up this trusted data delivery capability? And that's what we want to talk about today. We showed this last meeting that we had in person at ESIP, this Trusted Data Now initiative. Our vision is that data is so easy to get that a child can use it. That it's trusted and authoritative, data layers easily are accessible, timely, interoperable, easily understood, easily communicated, and trusted. So here's a couple of questions for getting started today. How can AI play a trusted role in accelerating visualization and understanding of data? Those of you who have used LLMs, no matter which ones they are, I believe they have little caveats at the bottom that say, check our answers. We could be wrong. And so we don't want to move forward as though that were a trusted data source unless we have some sort of validation or verification. And how can we add more data sets to our disaster readiness and response database? So I'm going to turn it over to Maggie so she can take it from here. And that covers the Trusted Data Now initiative and what we've been collecting so far. So Maggie?
Yeah. So I think 2 years ago or a year ago, our community fellow took upon himself a huge undertaking of collecting this information that we had been compiling over several years during the ESIP meetings and otherwise for the disaster lifecycle cluster to just and at first it was just an Excel spreadsheet, right? That people were inputting this information. So he went and went on to GitHub and made this beautiful interface that has information that could be helpful for people that are out there trying to get disaster related information. So if you see the example here, there's also the QR code and the little tiny URL, but you can see that there's different disaster types. There's the name of the data provider, what type of data it is, whether it is publicly accessible or not, whether it is active, the organization that runs it, and then a link. And then there's also some information there about the website status. And you can also submit more information to us about different data providers via this Google form. So what we wanted to do was provide a place where people could go and easily see the kind of information that may be helpful in looking at trusted data sets. And this was something that sort of was inspired by our good friend Phil Balin in California. He works with the California National Guard and with FEMA 9. He's always said, like, where can we get all of this data in one place? And so that was sort of what inspired us to put together this Trusted Data Now initiative and also build this interface. So Dave, I don't know what's next. Oh, we are going to Slido. So Gabby, did you want to go ahead and do this part, or do you want Dave and Ida?
I am good either way. I have the Slido questions up and I can press start on everything if you guys want to talk through it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So we've compiled some Slido questions for folks to input some responses so that we can kind of compile the information and have a better feel for what's going on out there. So our first Slido question is what we normally start with, which is who is in the room? So if you go to the Slido, there is the URL there and also the QR code. Our first question is, who are you? What is your primary connection to disaster related data? And I will see if I can post that directly into the Zoom chat. So, okay, so I am posting that directly into the Zoom chat. And Dave or Gabby, is somebody monitoring the responses?
I am. It
Okay.
seems like most of those attending today are from the data community, whether that's data managers, producers, providers. So yeah.
Excellent. Let's give you guys like another 30 seconds to, to respond. I will get the next Slido question URL ready.
There are still responses coming in. I can see it on my phone.
Okay, there you go.
And Maggie, I think the Slido URL is the same across all of
Oh,
the
okay.
questions, so no
All right.
worries on that.
Got it. Okay. Gabby, you want to go ahead and close the poll?
Yeah.
Is this the next question, Dave? Sorry.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. All right. So another question for data gathering purposes. Which disaster-related domain are you most connected to? I know that some folks are looking at multi-hazard sort of solutions. You are, data providers, data users, decision makers. So if you can just do a quick response to the Slido question. And Gabby, if you want to just let me know when the poll is starting to trickle.
Yeah, no, definitely is.
Okay.
Most are in extreme precip and flooding, but the next step is multiple hazards, and the next after that is wildfire.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Okay, Dave, do you want to?
Mm-hmm. There
All
we
right.
go.
So our next question is, and we've been talking about trusted data for years, and so we want to know, what does trusted mean? When do you decide whether to use data, and what matters the most when you are choosing to use that data? And then, Gabby, just feel free to speak up when you.
Yeah, I see recency, access, authoritative, where it's from and how old it is, context, it's easily accessible, how it's been used in the literature, accuracy. There are lots flooding in.
Excellent.
Ease of interpretation, the creator of the data set, their research integrity processes, and access and utility, too.
Awesome. Just go ahead and let us know when you want us to advance, Gabby, and then we'll.
One more second as responses were coming in. Used and trusted by others, uncertainty quantification. Really good. I think we can move on.
Okay. All right. So our next question, what is the biggest barrier for you? Where does trusted data most often break down? What is your experience with this? And what are the problems that arise that become a barrier?
Delivery is flaky or changing too often. Lack of communication about uncertainty and measurement. Understanding limitations or the appropriate use conditions. Failure to adhere to data standards. Insufficient metadata. Disaster interrupts collection. Not easily accessible.
Okay. Do you want to go on to the next one?
Yeah, it looks like responses have slowed.
Okay, and this has been a big topic that I think a lot of clusters and a lot of folks in our realm are dealing with, and it's, where does AI fit into all of this, particularly when we're looking at disasters? But do you use AI to generate trusted data, and if so, how do you show that it is trustworthy?
Yeah, I think Maggie and Dave, there's some questions about what you mean by generate, whether that's actually generating the data or using AI and other workflows to do with data.
I think it'd be
that's a good question. I would think AI is used to access data, which can be done pretty straightforward through Python scripting and things like that. What we're thinking about this particular one is, do you use AI to maybe access data, process it, and generate a product, or do you ask AI to generate a data product for you, and you either use it or look at it? Or the big point is, do you use AI as an agent to go out and get data and bring back a generated answer that you want, not just accessing it and displaying it? Did that make sense, Maggie?
Yes.
Good. And you can edit your response based on my response.
And it looks like the majority have it at no with 94%, and the responses have slowed down. So I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay. Here's another question about how AI fits into your workflow. Where do you think it could be useful in the disaster data lifecycle? Since we are the disaster lifecycle cluster, we'd like to know how you think that AI could be useful in terms of the lifecycle and what data that we would use.
Identifying relevant data to access and evaluate. To perhaps translate data into ordinary language for increased accessibility of information, but obviously caveats come with that. Translation of jargon, identifying patterns and anomalies, finding reports on impacts and for impacts datasets. General public can more easily use this disaster data. Awesome. It looks like responses have slowed down a little bit. Oh, one more second. Summarizing large amounts of data for decision makers, assisting with metadata generation. Awesome. This looks like a really good list. I think we can move on to the next question.
Okay. I believe that's the one that we're doing is the last slide of question for now. So continuing on the topic of AI, what is your biggest concern about using AI with disaster-related data? I know that Bandana Carr is on with us, and she gave a great presentation during the January meeting, and we've invited her back to to come guide us through some of the hot topics in AI. So, what is your biggest concern?
Inaccurate information, reliability, again, accuracy, misinterpretation, lack of understanding, uncertainty, hallucinations and incorrect analysis, giving confident answers when there's actually a lot of uncertainty, accountability with wrong information, processing data in a way that's not accurate for how extremes should be analyzed and communicated. Inaccuracy seems to be a really common theme.
Yeah.
Ability to understand the data generating process, and like lack of human in the loop procedures. I like the way that was worded. Awesome. It looks
These
like
are great answers.
Yeah. It looks like responses have slowed down a bit.
Okay, so I just a note on what we're hoping to do in this session. We don't want to sit and talk at you too much, so we wanted to do more of a roundtable discussion. And I believe Liz Arthur, are you in the room? Or are you? And also Bandana Carr are joining as sort of our roundtable experts. So right now what we would like to do is open up the discussion. And the first round for the roundtable is experience. Think of a time when data did not reach the right person at the right time in the right form. What happened? So what I'd like to do is open it up now. Bandana, if you'd like to say a few words, and then otherwise this will be an opportunity for some interaction with folks on Zoom and in the room. So I believe there's a microphone in the room. So if you want to participate in this discussion, please use the microphone, introduce yourself and your organization. So Vandana, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Maggie. And again, like Maggie said, you all are working on the field, and that's pretty much what was mentioned at the beginning with the Slido question. So you deal with this problem day in, day out. My experience of this situation comes from when I was a faculty and working with the Gulf Coast communities, and warnings are sent out whenever there is a hurricane, and how often the responses don't happen the way it is expected. Some of the things that we found out by interacting with the communities, the information did not reach the right person wasn't the problem, but it did not reach in the right form. What I mean by that, the Gulf Coast community, the Mississippi Gulf Coast where I used to live, includes people who are not speaking English. They speak another language. There is a language barrier issues, and we often don't think about it. So the information was shared with them, but in not the form where they can make sense of it and take appropriate action. So that was one issue. In other cases, they got the information from not the right source, not an authoritative source, the way it was pointed out, but from social media. And we have seen the hallucination problem that was mentioned with bots has happened with humans, where anything and everything is posted on social media. And that leads to a lot of chaotic situation. Either people are evacuating or they are not evacuating at all. In either case, emergency response does not work effectively the way we expect it to work. So that's my experience. And often the issue was the data that we thought is going to make sense wasn't there. The other thing we also found out, one of the things that Dave mentioned, was the spatial aspect of it. Often when people receive information through the wireless emergency alert messages, it says you are going to have a flood watch, but it does not provide enough information. If they need to evacuate, where are they going to evacuate? If they need to connect with someone for further information, who that POC is, where is the number? They identified a number of those things, 7 and 8 items, saying it is not about letting us know there is a problem going to happen, but providing us a solution and what kind of steps we can take to get to that solution point, including geospatial information with a timestamp associated with it. Because if they need to evacuate to a shelter and the shelter has a limited capacity, then they need to go ahead and seek sheltering ahead of time. But if they need to evacuate further because the shelter is full, then they have to deal with the gas stations because they need to fill up their tanks. So these are problems we don't think about during the entire process, and often the data we might have, but we did not think about it to disseminate to the recipients. That's my experience interacting with them, and that problem seems to happen even now. And the Texas flooding situation is a good example that it seems this problem is yet to be solved. Not because we haven't solved it, but it seems we are always putting it in the back seat and moving on and thinking AI is going to solve the problem. But AI is dependent on what we provide. It's not going to just do it on its own. But I would like to hear how you think in this context, is it the data not to be trusted or the process was not trustworthy? So if I bring AI into the mix, what do you think as experts in the field, it is going to work perfectly well, or we are going to fall short of even what we are achieving now?
Yeah, that's really a good point, Bandana. And one of the things that we work on, excuse me, is how can we communicate when hazards threaten cascading impacts, right? Like when one problem causes, when one problem causes several others. And so, for example, like strong winds could knock out electricity. Without power, a cell phone tower that lacks generator backup might stop working. A water pump may shut down, or a gas station may be unable to pump fuel, like Bandana mentioned. And so we're very interested in being able to access critical infrastructure type of information, but we do need it to be accurate. So that's a big challenge for us. And even validating some of the information that comes back is a challenge sometimes.
I'm interested to see if anybody in the room has any comments. Gabby, if they step up, and do they have a microphone, and maybe you can introduce yourself and share some thoughts.
Yeah, I think there is one.
Hi, this is Valerie Dixon from NASA ESDIS. I think when you talk about how to make AI data trustworthy, it highly depends on what data you're talking about. If you're talking about actual imagery data, like critical life death emergency, like response data, we need to come up with a way to have, I think, standardized like provenance that AI can recognize and pass along to say, this is where that data is from. This is when that data was gathered, and cite itself, right? So that that you can trust what it's telling you. And if you're talking about like, okay, well, these gas stations, they're out, I feel like Google Maps has got lots of little pop-ups of like, hey, there's there's an accident. Are they still there? And that crowdsources, accurate, up-to-date feedback on information that's important when you're evacuating, but isn't necessarily sourced from a government, authoritative source. And so there's different levels of accuracy and accountability that you need to consider depending on what you're talking about.
So do you see that as maybe the need for some sort of certification or level? Like we worked with the All Hazards Consortium over the last couple of years to generate the operational readiness levels for data, which was defined by the private sector owner and operators. Do you see that as maybe having some sort of attachment to data sets that are AI ready and that can follow through with a trust level?
Could you talk more about the operational readiness level?
Yeah. It was a way in which non-technical decision makers in the food, fuel, medical supply, communications, transportation, pharmaceutical delivery sectors, all the investor-owned utilities, they wanted to have a simple scale to be able to trust data when it's displayed in a dashboard. And so they came up with the All Hazards Consortium and also ESIP, the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster, to define ORL 1 through ORL 4, where all the data is trusted, but it really came down to timeliness of that data. And when we say all the data that's trusted, it's mainly from NOAA, some data from NASA, that it goes into the dashboard. So that's what it's a kind of a living sort of thing, so it can evolve, but that's how it's being used currently.
I was just going to say, Monica, who is on the Zoom, you've got a lot of great comments that you've shared in the chat. Would you like to come off of mute and talk about some of the items that you've pointed out there? No worries. We'll go ahead and collect all of the comments, but Monica's made some good points about making the demonstration of clear benefits, and also trying to collect data on sort of how people feel about the reliability of AI produced results. So I think that's really great. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to throw in their hat and chat about this?
I have a point. I have a question, and I don't want to divert the discussion, but I'll just have Monica, you please go ahead, then I'll chime in.
Oh, sorry. Can you guys hear me? Am I
Yes.
audible? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, I think, and this was in response to an earlier question, actually, I jumped in the chat. But I think there's a lot of stigma around AI. And that's because most people are probably exposed to AI in contexts where its failures or its hazards and harms are being talked about more than the potential benefits, right? And so I think, if we're going to employ AI in science, there's two things that we can do. One is to understand like what sorts of criteria operate to determine trust or reliability and actually lead to people placing confidence in AI versus if we're going to think about physical modeling systems, AI in that sense, or traditional communication modes. And so that's where social science studies, I think, can go a long way to help us identifying what sort of criteria that we need to satisfy when not only are we talking about this, but when we're building systems, because there might be certain design elements that we need to take into account in order for AI systems to be seen as trustworthy. And then, of course, there's going to be other indicators of trustworthiness like transparency and whatnot, and actual demonstrated skill according to metrics that people care about. I would point out that there's a researcher at University of Illinois named Chris Wurz, who actually did with respect to numerical weather prediction models and what indicators of trustworthiness are and the use of AI in that disciplinary context. He has a really interesting article that's WIRZ from like the past year. And then just the other thing that I wanted to highlight is that, and just is kind of a, I guess just a caveat here. This comes from my kind of background where we were trying to explain to people and this is controversial, sorry, but the potential benefits of various sorts of climate intervention technologies, right? And a lot of time the comparison that people make is between like a world where there's intervention versus a world where there's no intervention, but there's also no climate change, right? And so like we often engage in these sorts of comparisons where the comparisons are unfair. And so I would say one thing that we could do is we could, numerical weather prediction, to go back to that again, has demonstrated like accuracy that goes beyond numerical model skill in some respects with respect to certain phenomena. And so kind of like, showcasing and demonstrating that, in this comparative sense, we can actually reduce harm if we rely on AI for the purposes for which it's fit, and we've demonstrated its fitness, as opposed to it being kind of like we're going to jump on the AI bandwagon and use it for everything, sort of approach. So yeah, those are just the sort of things I was thinking. Thanks. Sorry. It's really loud in my house right now, so I had to jump outside quickly.
No, it's great. Thanks for that, Monica. That's terrific. That's great.
And I wanted to add a couple of points to Monica's statement, because I think one of the things that is happening is jumping in that AI bandwagon. And one is that the numerical prediction model that Monica is saying, and AI has been used to forecast, but it fails short in terms of forecasting the tail end risks, the high impact, low probability events. That are the major problems, and most of the models are not at this point designed for that. In the energy sector we live in, we are currently talking about all the time about how the grid is going to function to future risks, not just from those kind of events, because we don't know what those are and what the demand and supply is going to look like. But the load growth from AI is causing an additional layer of uncertainty that we are unable to capture. Then I'm going back to the other, like asking the question with the AI side. So much of push is on AI. It doesn't matter whether it is LLM or any other model with vision model and so on and so forth. We are not talking about the energy sector's role. Today only, there has been an announcement. There will be a lot of push for nuclear power plants, and 5 states have been identified where the nuclear wastes are going to be deposited. It seems like we didn't learn from 3 Mile Island at all. We are back there because we need more energy for AI to function. If we are thinking about increasing efficiency, increasing effectiveness, interoperability as we are using data sets, shouldn't those same metrics be applied to AI and hold true? Because if my AI models are not efficient in terms of time, energy, cost, are they really useful to the community? Is the community benefiting for it when they are going to be at the receiving end of the nuclear power plant waste sites? That's a disaster we are not talking about. We are talking about all the natural events, but this is a human-made disaster that we are basically running headlong without putting any forethought to the value proposition of AI beyond the accuracy issues that we all have identified. Like, it is a broad question from me as a scientist to everybody. How should we function in this context? Is the goal to make our life better with data, or is our goal to make our life, I don't know what, because we are all in that AI bandwagon. It makes us look cool. And that requires having a conversation with the communities that Monica brought up. The social scientists have to be in the room to think about the implications, the human aspect of it. That seems to be lost in this context.
There's also a comment in the room.
This is, Mike Mahoney, USGS. This is going back quite a ways, but just talking about the challenges with provenance when you're looking at these systems, and especially AI augmented retrieval of data. We have the challenge sometimes where if you are Googling these days, like what is the most recent stream flow stage height at a given location, and the result that you get at the top of Google these days is oftentimes not the link to a USGS page, but rather the generative engine's explanation, which for cost reasons, efficiency reasons, often is cached a significant amount of time and can be significantly behind the real-time data. And we're talking about this after, decades at this point of training about Google being, relatively authoritative, that for understandable reasons, the thing that's getting returned at the top of these results is no longer necessarily going to be as authoritative as what people are accustomed to. And so this has been a challenge, I think, that is growing in a lot of areas where even separate from hallucinations, anything like that, you can just introduce these areas of additional latency or areas where if data is getting corrected, it's not getting updated in these downstream systems that looked once at whatever they're ingesting from and then never updated it again. And especially in the current moment where the majority of these AI retrieval systems people are interacting with are hosted by corporations that don't necessarily have a lot of levers that you can push to adjust what is getting updated there and how often it's getting updated. I think it can make it really difficult to make sure that a general audience is able to access things that they need to when you don't necessarily have those avenues to actually put input into what they get back from a web search anymore.
That's a really great point. I know there's some way that you can do a Google search without employing the AI, but I'm not sure everybody knows about that. So do we want to go ahead and flip to the next question? All right. So for the next question, it has to do with defining the problem. And I think we've touched on this a little bit in this discussion too, but what makes the data trusted enough to be used in the context of disasters and decision-making in other contexts? When, some of this data does have some urgency to get to people that, might be making decisions. So what exactly does make it trusted enough to be used in the disasters context? And I will open up the discussion.
We have a question in the room or comment.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Dave, Maggie, this is Douglas. One, I think the comment is more who is the user of this data. That's more specifically because for people who are in their house looking at what smoke impact from wildfire might be different than the emergency managers who are responding to active fire in the managed forest or in the areas they're responsible for. So I think that's really depends on the users who are really talking about in this context. So maybe we need to be more specific for different user profiles when we're talking about trusted enough data. And one of the recent example would be the Ghost-19 ABI data went offline for about a day or so because the satellite had some issues need to sort through. So I have never seen so many people talking about Ghost-19 or ABI on a broadcast methodology by the broadcast meteorologists, because they are acknowledging, because without that data, they cannot really track the storm and all those severe weathers that they use in the communication with public. So I think that's an example about timeliness of the data and then the accessibility of those data.
Yeah, that's a good point, Douglas. And I was also thinking about what Mike just said from USGS. When you go and Google something, if they have it in cache, even if you're just a person who wants to know where the smoke is or where the fire is, if that location of the fire is cached and there's an evacuation order for you and all they're using is Google, that could be a big problem.
This is Jenny Hughes, and I work with NASA's wildfire system firms, and I don't have an answer to this question, but I did want to reiterate what Douglas said, which is it absolutely depends on the stakeholder group making use of the data. And we certainly find that operational stakeholders, so wildland fire managers, understand how to use the satellite data in a very different way than the public does. And when we have wildfire events such as the ones we saw this weekend in the US, in France, in Spain, we actually spend a huge amount of time managing that in terms of users who will email and ask whether they should evacuate or whether there's an active fire near their home, etc. And it really, it kind of behooves us to help them understand the strengths and the limitations of the data. And I was thinking about this with regard to the AI question. For us, it really is, it's kind of twofold. On the one hand, we could really see utility in incorporating AI to help with this exact question in kind of socializing the data. But then firms has really, I think, evolved because of the trustworthiness of the data. And therefore, if AI introduces misinformation or some kind of accuracy issues, then we've lost it in firms. So it's a very real and kind of evolving scenario, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Jenny. It's good to see you online. I'm wondering if if people who are using firms' data are they using it because they think that the firm's data is giving them one thing when they're expecting another?
Sorry, Dave, we were just playing musical microphones then.
No worries.
Are they expecting something other when they receive the data? And well, I mean, I think again, it really depends on the user. If it's a Department of Natural Resources and they have a GIS specialist who knows how to use the data, then they know what it can be used for, right? And certainly not for deployment of personnel, things like that, right? But maybe for alerting of a new ignition.
Yeah.
But if it's a member of the public and they're trying to use it to plan whether to evacuate or not, that's a huge concern, because that isn't what the data are intended for. And actually, an additional consideration is third-party vendors who take the data and repackage it, and then use it in two ways to first of all for charging, right? So they'll repackage the data and then make it available at cost, embedded in an app. But also, if they are then using that data in some kind of evacuation type app, that becomes another issue that really has to be managed. So, I mean, there is such a myriad of considerations, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And Monica has pointed out one thing, and I'll just add about the issue of misinterpreting the data and what is mentioned. It's not about, it's in addition to who is the user of the data, it is also what is the data supposed to be used for. It's not saying, yes, I have this data, like the forms data, what Monica mentioned, being misinterpreted. It comes down to understanding the usability of it, not just saying, hey, we have this data, and the third-party vendors, if they don't have a better understanding of how the data sets are being released and what the raw format looks like, so on and so forth, they are just using it in a sellable format with some value-added component to it, but the interpretation is dependent on the user, and if the user doesn't understand, then we have problem multiplying in every direction, and then some backlash is coming to the agency that is providing it, and AI is going to make it a little more problematic than we expected in that context.
Yeah, I think Monica has her hand up, and I'll go ahead and give her the opportunity to respond as well.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to point out that and I mean, I think firms is an interesting example because I don't know how many people have been or are on social media, but like somebody uploaded the global map, a firm's product without explanation of what like people are actually looking at. And there's been like just gross misinterpretation of like wildfires based on the uploading of that map without any sort of contextualizing information. But I think also the other examples that were given about some of these data products just points to the need to like better understand, but probably more so communicate the fitness of data for various sorts of purposes. And that's really hard because you can't anticipate all the purposes for which a data set might ultimately be used. But I think producers are certainly aware of some of the major limitations or possible misinterpretations of data. And that's something that we need to increase documentation, dissemination, and communication of. And it's going to become increasingly important, I think, as people kind of automate data discovery, automate a lot of other processes and practices around data with AI. And we need to think about kind of how do we do this in an ordinary language and machine readable form so that, you know, when people are utilizing this for AI, there's something that can kind of be flagged there. But then also people, you know, this kind of, you know, example from social media, right? We have ordinary language, easily accessible explanations of like what data tells us versus not telling us, so that the public also is able to understand where there might be limitations that makes it inadequate for jumping to certain conclusions or whatnot.
Quick comments from me again. This is Douglas. I promise I'm going to be quiet afterwards. I think it's also the the reliability of the data delivery. I think there's some recent discussion within the Wi-Fi cluster where there are some delays in the NFC data, as well as there's some recent delays on firms data itself because the increasing interest of for Wi-Fi data during those major events. So thinking about the reliability of those data delivery methods and how can we duplicate those data delivery and accessibility to ensure that for those disasters, a lot of times it's really emergency that the stakeholders can have the reliable access to those data would be really important. I think one of the example is one of the ways maybe having delivery through different mechanisms, like for example, NOAA has the open data dissemination program where a lot of those high value data sets are disseminated through 3 public cloud providers, including AWS, Google, and Microsoft. So that combining with some of those AI technologies that may be able to source through different resources to make sure that people can have access directly to those data sets, no matter what, maybe one service went down, so they still have the backup to have those data.
This is Jenny again. I'll make one more comment and then I promise I will shut up as well. I think another consideration is the end of the EOS missions and also the end of SMPP, which, you know, all of those things are going to come to reality. And I think the biggest issue with that is we will lose MODIS AM, and that's the first detection of the day. And so, you know, for a lot of wildfires, particularly in certain areas where cloud cover is less in the mornings, that could be the only detection of the day. And so once that has all gone, I can see, there will be some interesting times ahead. And every time that satellite does go down now, we're certainly very, very much aware of it from users. That's it.
And you guys feel free to discuss. You don't have to feel that everybody's comments are valid. Do you want to go ahead and move on to the next question?
We have
Dave?
one more comment.
Oh, one more. Never mind. Go ahead.
Hi, Matt Tricomi. I support NIFC in a few different hats, including on the grounds of firefighter, as well as putting the data fire COP together, common operating picture together. Love hearing all the tech and wildfire. Obviously, we need all help we get. I really love the last comment, not the fact that MODIS and VAERS or whatever were starting to be impacted, but the reality that the detections are going to be limited from different points. I think I kind of heard the tenor that we want to switch topics, so I'll make this brief. For when we talk about detections or initial attack, things like that, from a NIFC point of view and what we train in an NWCG is we have to have the data coordinated in a fire COP environment before we use it. We don't encourage any unofficial use, such as watch duty, crowdsourcing for any official decisions. And so when we talk about heat detections, that was a great thread. We don't just use MODIS and VAERS. We also use things like Hawkeye, which is something that Forest Service runs. We're coordinating with FireGuard, which is something we're working with National Guard and one of the DoD groups. We worked with PNNL. They had created a radar, RADR, not the word, and then a few others to help with the heat detections. We also fly our own planes on flights, so the planes that we fly aren't just a suppression that you see, the red stuff coming down in the water. We fly, there's a group called IAA, and they hire 12 different vendors following very specific specs, and they actually get video imagery, and then IRIN comes through, that's the IR investigator and analyst, and they'll actually get the scattered heat, intense heat, and we'll get those daily, and they're clearly marked. It used to take a half hour to get the download from the plane. We're now down to 2 minutes. So my point is, though, we actually don't trust in NIFC and FAM, which is a U.S. Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management, anyone to use AI to do any derivatives at this time. What we do trust, though, with AI use is maybe assistance to help find, if that makes sense, or to help filter, but not actually do derivative summaries or anything like that. And I think it's going to be like that for at least another 2-3 years, because in the fire world, there's two things we don't like. We don't like change and the way things are. So it'll take a while. So it's my 2 cents.
So Matt, I have a quick question for you, Matt, before you give up the microphone at NIFC there. The fire COP that you have, does that have access, trusted data access, where decision makers could come in and get data as a web service?
Yeah. Over the last 2.5 years, they've worked on a version 1. They want to call it next generation of the Fire COP. By the way, it's an ironic name, Fire and COP. You know, Fire and COPs don't get along, but nonetheless, egp.wildfire.gov. There's a series of 15 apps we currently have right now, but the main flagship one for what we call situational awareness, which has a curated set of services that we want. It's all available in a service, but it's also in an application, mobile and web. And then we have a catalog of 200 services that we've curated, said these are good to go, like kind of a thumbs up. And then the dispatcher or a situation leader, an IRIN, whatever your 150 roles are, they can come in and save their favorite presets, save their favorite incidents, favorites, bad word, but pinned incidents. And they can focus on what they need. And then they can extract that, download it, and bring it into their other tool sets. So it's egp.wildfire.gov or the Wildfire SA tool, they call it. Over time, though, we don't have a temporal spatial, I always say that word wrong, but time and space solution yet, like a lakehouse, a warehouse, a Databricks or whatever. That's where we're going next. And we don't have that solution yet, but they're in the middle of ideating that. So you can start to do trend analysis, progression analysis, all that stuff. Hopefully it helps.
No, that's great. That's great. One final point, and that is Maggie mentioned Phil Balin, who's on the West Coast with California National Guard and FEMA Region 9. One of his requests have been over the years, it would be really nice to know when a disaster happens, and let's just say wildfire, what planes are going to be up in the air, what satellites are going to be orbiting and collecting data, and when is that data going to be available, and when can where can I go to get that so we can make our decisions much faster? And so his item of observation has been there is no place to get that. And I don't know if you're working on that from a wildfire standpoint, but it would certainly be something that would be very welcome in many different sectors.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and move to the next question. This is really great. All right. So I think this might have been covered in some of the stuff that we've been talking about, but for this next question, we're talking about the tools. So what would make a community curated trusted data and tools resource genuinely useful during a disaster preparation or response? I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but if folks have some thoughts on this, certainly interested in seeing or hearing seeing what you have to say. Don't everybody speak up at once. So one of the things that the cluster has been doing, as we showed in previous slides, is we're trying to create the community curated trusted data resource through ESIP that's been developed. And so how you, I know, and Dave brings up the point of Phil Balin bringing this up almost, every time he's able to join us, but there's no singular repository that kind of gathers all of this information together. Now, if that existed, would that be helpful, or how helpful would something like that be?
Yeah, and I think, something that Matt was just describing at NIFC from a wildfire standpoint is something that is incredibly valuable. And when you branch out to other hazards and threats, I don't know if there's such a consolidated area of trusted information to get access to. And one example that comes up with us is we work. I mentioned the All Hazards Consortium before, and they have 45,000 stakeholders that are out there in the private sector trying to keep the economy moving, restoring power when disasters hit, responding to floods, and trying to deliver medical supplies around disaster areas. That they're not science experts, and they don't have science experts on staff. And so they're looking for ways in which they can put science data to use and trust it out of the box. And so what we're trying to do within the disaster lifecycle cluster is identify those trusted sources so we can then test them and then present them to some of these owners and operators, so they can start to benefit from science data. And, just one question out there for the group is, when we're talking about, provenance and metadata, improving that kind of stuff, is there something that should go in the metadata about how to use this data, and where are relevant training, where's relevant training materials, not, to a researcher, but to a non-technical decision maker? Are there training materials that are available that can be put to use so we can really accelerate the use of science data, of trusted science data for decision making?
We have a comment in the room.
Yeah. Mike Mahoney again, USGS. So we have this application, the National WAR dashboard, that we've been expanding in this direction in recent years, where we now have these, what we call thematic views, that if you're interested in flooding data, in drought data, for instance, it's this web mapper that you can customize, click one of these areas, And C, for flooding, it pulls up NWS flood alerts, any precipitation gauge that's registered data in the last hour or so, gauges that are currently in flood stats, things like that. And I think what we find when we're talking to folks about these products and trying to be curating things for events is that folks generally, when we do like user interviews and user feedback for this product, what we hear a lot is that during an event is the worst time to be learning new things and the worst time for them to be confused by anything. And so folks, when you are thinking about, a curated repository for this data, I do think part of it is having to be something that is going to be obvious to use with minimal need for interpretation, which then requires some amount of deciding for which data is going to be broadly applicable enough for most instances that it's worth showing. That if there's something that is extremely high quality for a county, perhaps that's not something that's going to be more distracting for most people than it is for, depending on what you're viewing as the user base for this tool. Being able to curate things in a way that's going to reduce that cognitive load at what's going to be a stressful time when people think to look at this. So my thoughts, at least on like as far as training materials go, is that to some extent, a tool like this, the more self-documenting it's able to be, the better.
Yeah, that's great. That's great input. And I think when you provide geospatial data to someone and they don't have a lot of experience in using it, that data tells them information, and then they infer a lot of things that is probably not correct, because they don't have that expertise.
In this case also, because the data we have already discussed, they come from so many different sources, then the community curated data and tool resource needs to be constantly updated, and a description has to be provided for someone to, in layman terms, so they can use it. Or else the example we have about farms data being posted on social media and misinterpreted, then we are back to the similar issue. It is not the access to the data, but understanding the usability of the data. And if the data set is not constantly maintained and updated by the community members, then they might be using an older version, and that can lead to different challenges by the user group and specific user communities. So there are certain things that we have to identify and maintain. And in the previous session, there was discussion about different metadata standards. And when we go to that aspect of metadata standards, it may not influence the users from user perspective, but we have to make sure how we store the data and what kind of metadata we are maintaining, so it is searchable by different engines and so on and so forth. So it is doable, but we have to identify all the things we need to do to make that data and tool resource broadly used by different communities, not just be a repository of everything out there.
We have a comment in the room.
Yep. This is Valerie from NASA again. I'm just going to, I think, probably rehash what we've already discussed a lot, but I think it very much pertains to this question of it depends on which community, which data, and for what purpose. And I think that those all have slightly different answers. If the community is a trusted source of scientists who are going to be putting out accurate data, and for what purpose, that's different than a public community curated data. But also, I'm very biased when it comes to metadata. I think metadata can make or break an awful lot. And if there's a way that we could standardize a fit for purpose, a way to represent that. I don't know that the operational readiness level is quite that. That's more of like a reputable scale as opposed to a what is this and is it not good for, which is hard to put in a standard format that's machine readable and catalogable in a tool or app easily. But yeah, I mean, we've hit on all of the cases, I think, that previous discussions cover.
I believe Monica has another comment. So
sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
All right, I'm like running outside again. I started talking before I hit the audio button. This is like a tiny bit self-promoting, and I really apologize. But with respect to that last comment, I actually have an NSF funded grant that we recently received at NCAR to actually formalize a fitness for purpose ontology for use in metadata for geoscience data. So I would just love to talk with anybody in this room about that sort of thing. But we are starting to do work on that sort of thing to at least be able to capture in some sort of standardized machine readable form attributes of data that might exclude use in certain applications. Because as I noted earlier, you can't anticipate all possible data uses, but I think that there's certain limitations that need to be captured and disseminated in various ways that will help people identify, especially risky uses when data is unfit for their purpose. So we're kind of trying to go at it from a different angle. But this is something that just like literally 2 weeks ago we started to work on and would love to work with. I think it was NASA who just made the comment about how we need that standardization stuff, but also anybody else.
Mike
If you have any, if you have any information on that, Monica, that you can post, that'd be great. And then go ahead.
Yeah, Mike Mahoney yet again. But on the USGS side of things, we're coming really close to publishing what we call our fit for purpose framework as well. We should expect that by the end of the calendar year, I'd say. And we've hinted at this in a number of different places, but effectively what the conversation has landed on is that to some extent, you don't necessarily know what the end user's going to consider acceptable to their end. And so as everyone's talking about, right, the best you can do is document it. And so the direction that we're headed in is to put out as much information as we can about methods used to calculate the data, any deviations from those methods. And that's going to be stuff that is going to not be extremely parsable when you are needing to move quickly. But then ideally as well, publishing uncertainty estimates around measurements and what we view as being the data's categorization. Is it something that falls into our standard data categories? Is it something collected with more experimental methods? Is it something that, due to some exceptions to the methods, is of a more limited use? And so we're trying to move in that direction ourselves, which I'm not saying it's a very broad categorization to just have those three things for everything. But I think that, we're also trying to push in this direction to be able to flag when we say, have data that is where you care about it, maybe more recent, things like that, but not necessarily to the same standards as what we're more accustomed to putting out, but might enable more rapid response when necessary.
Okay, Monica has one more comment, but then I'd like to go to the last question and then kind of.
And we have one more in-house comment too. If you want to have Monica go first, that works.
Yeah, go ahead, Monica. If you're talking, you're on mute, Monica.
I did it again. I'm so sorry. I now have a dog barking in the background. So I think those are really important comments. And one thing that I just want to quickly flag is that the data fitness that I'm largely working from is thinking about model output. And there's going to be different fitness conditions for different sorts of data sets that come from different sources. So like the things that we need to flag and represent include like uncertainty, but also phenomenological and statistical representativeness out of models for certain things. And it's also not going to be used in these kind of immediate urgent situations either. And so the dissemination is going to look a little bit different. But I think like there's a lot of, relativity here, such that I don't know that you could have a super general like data fitness framework that is applicable across all geoscience data types.
Go ahead and get that last comment in the room, and then we can go to the last question.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Carol Ruckdy. I'm from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. This might take us on a tangent that we don't want to go down, so I'm just too curious to ask this question, but since I'm not involved with disaster communication, this might be a naive question. How does citizen live streaming add or remove trust in disaster data and warnings? I would imagine folks in certain generations have a high level of trust in live streams. So how do you navigate that? As in like TikTok live streams of fires or some other disaster?
Yeah,
sorry.
I'll just give a little input on that, and that is that, live streams are just strictly from the person's perspective that's giving the live stream. They're not, if they're out there to get clicks and use language that is highly charged to get people to watch, that does nothing to help anybody that's watching that live stream, unless they're able to geographically orient themselves and tell people where that is heading. So for us at Storm Center Communications, and we have a YouTube channel, but we don't do live streams, that kind of input can be more confusing, I think, than helpful.
It is. Like in our study, when we had done it for the Gulf Coast communities, they wanted the authoritative sources to use those kind of social media channels to disseminate the information, not themselves using it as a way of communicating with each other and relying on it, because that does lead to reduction in accepting whatever information is coming down. And if there is an evacuation notice is in place, they are not going to follow through. And that was a major challenge when we had Twitter that was widely used to understand what is happening on the ground, how the responses are happening. And the question was, to what extent the Twitter data that we were using that time had a geostamp to associate it with the location information, and often that was lacking. And now the same problem happens with someone just having pictures and videos of it to talk about it, but they are not really on the ground experiencing the problem to provide any kind of guidance and suggestion, and that causes a lot more compound issue with regard to the response activities.
Yeah, that's great. You want to press forward on the next one? We're probably going to need to wrap up soon if we want to kind of like give the last couple of slides, but I wanted to give the opportunity to discuss the last question, Dave. Uh-oh. Dave has frozen.
We have another response while maybe Dave comes back, if that's okay, yeah. Maggie.
Yeah. Let me text him and see if he's okay.
Dave's live stream is frozen.
It is.
No, I was joking. So this is Vishu Nandigam. I'm from the Supercomputer Center in San Diego. Speaking of live streams, I think it again comes down to an authoritative source. In California, we have HP REN network, which has cameras showing live streams of different important areas, and that's being used for early detection warnings using AI. And I know there's a lot of skeptics here about AI, but I think with the data deluge, you got to remember that as more sensors come online, more data comes online, eventually we need to go towards automated sources, including AI. And I think the better way to deal with it is, I think somebody mentioned provenance. And the provenance doesn't come just from the data source, but also to inference from AI models. That's open models, open weights, carrying the information, provenance information throughout the whole chain, end-to-end workflows. So that's something that maybe the disaster panel here can help with set standards.
Actually, I think we have a couple of Slido questions at the end here, and I'd like to give you guys the opportunity. I think we've probably covered this. So I'm going to go ahead. Gabby, am I remembering this correctly? Oh. So just I think that you've gotten the gist of what we do for the Disaster Lifecycle Cluster. We facilitate the connections and coordinate efforts. And why we do it is to help to identify the trusted data and create partnerships that enable the better situational awareness. So I think there are a couple more Slido questions. Gabby, if you want to go ahead and turn those on. And one of the last questions we want to ask is, what should we prioritize in the disaster lifecycle cluster? We tried to make kind of a 6-month roadmap so that we're ready to talk about, kind of do a retrospective as well as looking forward for what we could do at the next ESIP meeting. But we also have our cluster meetings once a month. But what would be the most valuable contribution that the disaster lifecycle cluster could work on in the next 6 months before we all come back and meet together? And Gabby, if you want to share some of the responses, that would be great.
Yeah, it seems a little slower, so still waiting. A trusted data sources list is one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we that was the reason we developed the community curated tool. And I think that URL will come back up, but that's what we had developed with our previous fellow. So, and I think that URL will come up.
And then disaster specific or area specific data sources.
Mm-hmm.
Those seem like the main ones.
Oh, and Dave said there's a tornado warning, so he won't be back. Real time.
How to use data in a disaster workbooks or prep. And then prioritize who you want to serve, whether it's the public or responders, and what a tool should accomplish, then define data needed and how to present it.
Okay. I'm going to try to rush us through here just so that I can get you the concluding information. So let's go ahead and do the next question. And I think this is the last one, Gabby, am I right? Is this just how interested would you be in participating with the disaster lifecycle cluster? Based on what you have heard today, we're just trying to get an idea of are people more interested in staying informed or getting down to business with this and really getting some input in. I will give you a moment to do that, and then some information on our cluster meetings, which happen once a month. And Gabby, I don't know if you want to report out on.
Yeah, it's really good. I feel like a lot of people are interested, kind of falling in the middle from 2 to 4. So it's pretty awesome.
Excellent. Well, I'll give you guys a few minutes to respond to that, but I'd like to go ahead and conclude so you guys can get out of there on time. So, as I mentioned before, and this is something that has been asked in the chat as well, is how can you help, and where do we have this information now? This is part of our Trusted Data Now initiative. And you can add web services or any other tools that might be available that we don't have in there via Google Forms. So the QR code and the tiny URL there will take you directly to the tool that was developed to help to kind of get this stuff all in one place. And then I'm just looking at my, and then let's see here, keeps nodding. Okay, as I mentioned, we do have a cluster meeting. It is the first Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we encourage you to join the disasters email list, which is listed there. And also, if you have any questions, keep in touch with us. There's Dave's email, there's my email, and there's Gabby's email. So we think that will do it for us today. Yes. I believe that's the last slide. So thank you so much for all of our online and in-person participants. Your comments and discussion were very helpful for kind of getting the juices flowing for what we would like to take a look at. So thanks so much for attending. And I don't know if there's some last comments. We've got about 5 minutes left, but I don't want to keep you guys over because I know it's the end of your day.
I think there might be one more comment in the room.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on that one about social media and crowdsourcing information. It's I like the one comment earlier talking about there's audiences between public and professionals. But there is actually a use for professionals on the social media and the crowdsourcing side. What we talk about is when we're in initial attack or early transport, we call it the familiarity phase. We'll absolutely use this social media stuff as much as our command hates it. We will not use it for decisions. We will not use it for actions. An example is I'm traveling on a hotshot crew from Montana to California. I'm on a 2-week assignment. I know nothing about the fire. I'm just jumping over a 6-month season, assignment to assignment to assignment. Everything blends together. Every peak blends together. I don't know the area, but for me to be safe, I need to understand the fuels and stuff. And everyone posts on their Instagram or whatever, and you can see the fire behavior. We're taught how to read smoke. Getting it in data does nothing for us. But getting that video, we're not worried about the dude going, hey, check out my live stream. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for just some mom and leaving with their family all freaked out, but they caught something there and like, oh, we didn't know there were power lines there. We're looking for things that aren't coming from the data. And as we're going on that 24-hour rig trip, because you can't go over 55 in these big rigs, it's a long ride, we're consuming a lot of that. So I love that you guys are focusing on data, but content is of huge value. Now, when I'm on the line, though, my laces, lookout, communication, escape routes, safety zones, no, that's official. So I just wanted to throw that out there. There is a place for it, and we absolutely use it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just ask a favor of the folks in the room, if you're able to go into our Google Doc and sign in with your name, affiliation, and email. I believe Monica was trying to catch some of the folks that had discussed, and I don't think I caught it either. But if you're able to do that, that would be really appreciated. And I don't, Gabby, do we have that somewhere? Let me just get out of here. Oops.
Yeah, if you wanted to
think
share.
that it's. Oh, yeah, go ahead and share. I will stop.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Do you want me to? I don't know where it is. Oh, here it is.
It's that one. Yep.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. So yes, if you could please use the QR code there or the tiny URL, and it will take you to our notes document. And then if you could just input your information, name, affiliation, email, that would be very helpful for the folks that are online that didn't necessarily catch your name, and also for us that didn't necessarily have all of your information. So with that, it is slightly before 5:30 for you guys. I'm going to go ahead and close the session so that you can get on with your day and enjoy your dinner and the rest of your week. So thank you so much for attending.
Thank you.